Services District meeting of January 11th, 2023. We are going to have two kind of separate agendas here. We have a workshop that will be first, thanking of representatives from the Central Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board and our county EHS staff who are here to have a workshop. And then after that will be our regular board meeting. So with that, we will please all rise and join the pledge. Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And Mr. Savage, we don't have a roll call, is that on the regular board meeting?
Correct.
Okay. All right, so then our first item will be public comments. We'll start with Mr. Tom Nelson.
This is probably going to be an appropriate time for it. It came to me out of our last meeting, and I kind of entitled this Perspective and Perception. They're two words that describe how someone sees something and how that person is seen by others. And they can be closely related and often connected. Perspective, we all have a perspective. It's how we look at something or an idea. We like to think our perspective is clear and correct, and others should be able to just see it right away, and they'll follow along. Perspectives carry with them a certain natural bias of the individual. Our perspective is our view of ourselves, our family, our community, and our world. It's our individual view, not necessarily everyone else's view. Perception is how each of us see and think what we think we understand, what others think and do. That is perception, not perspective. Perception becomes reality if the perspective is not shared. How do we bring the two in harmony? Well, I'm hopeful that this is what is going to come out of all these meetings. How do we share that perspective? We work to be open, engaging, and honest about how we see things and how we achieve a mutual goal. There were some comments made at the last meeting that kind of started me thinking about where those comments came from and the perception that came with them. Director Ross made some comments about, he talked to a lot of people and they just don't think about what happens to their wastewater. It just happens. They don't even think about it. They don't give it a second thought. If you don't live in a community that has septic tanks, you don't think about it. It's happened. They don't know the cost. They don't know how it got there. They don't care. They weren't there when it was built. It's just there now. They don't want to think about a lot of things that go on in the community. They don't have an opportunity for it to matter until it fails, or it needs to be repaired, or they have to replace a lateral line. Because that happens in a sewer system also. They don't know what other options they have or could have had when they were starting out. They don't have any idea what the costs are. They have no idea how much they're paying constantly to their property taxes for that maintenance. If you have no involvement in an outcome and no perspective on what will happen, your perception winds up being limited. Also at the board meeting, President Fairman commented about he saw a large pumping truck in town and that hopefully soon we wouldn't see that anymore. Well, we might not see that, but we'll see dump trucks and we'll see lots of other vehicles coming in, and we might still see pumping trucks. And if you go to a city that has a sewer system, you'll see the video trucks that are running through the sewer system constantly to make sure that they're all working.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Captain Wilson.
Thank you, President Fairman. I just want to take this opportunity to remind all of us, including our guests, that this little local agency was created to ensure local control over the remediation of this township's groundwater quality problem. It's not a septic problem or a sewer problem, it's a groundwater quality problem primarily. So here we are, a small community with, frankly, a relatively small problem. And as a result, the idea was to come up with a sufficient but still small solution. small in scope, small in disruption to our tourism economy and our valley residents, and of course the goal was a small price tag in the immediate and over time. That's why this board and the majority of this community agreed to work on the solution subsequently memorialized in Resolution 1904 that was unanimously adopted by the CSD board in August 2019. That resolution was consistent with the input received from the county in the Santa Ynez Valley Community Plan and from 2009 and in the wastewater management plan from EHS in 2010. And I'm just going to take the rest of my time because I want to highlight a few things here that may have gotten lost. We have new board members. I don't think, Director Ross, I don't know if you were on the board at the time it was adopted. I know Director Parks is new. So as a reminder, this was a resolution adopting a project description. And to initiate seeking out declare intent to begin special studies, environmental process, pursuit of grant and loan funding, and initiate the Prop 218 assessment process, all to be consistent with the project description. It says, whereas the Board of Directors has had 3 public workshops with the purpose of describing the options and developing a project description to accomplish the mission and goals. Whereas the district has drafted a project description consistent with the presentations and inputs from the citizens of the district, the Regional Water Quality Control Board, and the County EHS. So here, the Board of Directors do declare that their intent that based on this project description attached here to begin special studies, environmental process, pursuit of grant and loan funding, and initiate the 218 assessment process and all other tasks associated with project development and implementation, all to be consistent with the project description. That's why I keep mentioning it. It's why I keep coming back to it. And it's why it's hard when people say there is no project description, we just don't know what to do. We have one. And it's really thoughtful. It even says that the staff and the directors, they're going to implement the project as described, and here it is. Regarding residential onsite, it has 4 components, right? We have the LAMP, the residential onsite, we have financial outreach, we have implementation of local groundwater, and phased collection and treatment.
Thank you.
I have copies.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hurdell.
Yeah, good evening. I'm assuming you guys are watching Lake County EHS and the Regional Water Quality Control Board, Mrs. Gray.
Ms. Gray, and I'm on the Regional Water Quality.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So my name is Mark Hurdell. I was a Cal Poly student in the 90s, and I came from a little town, Los Olivos, and sometimes we got confused with a little town called Los Osos, and it kind of got stuck in my head, but I didn't want Los Olivos to go through what I heard what Los Osos was going through as a Cal Poly student. So I got very involved in this. I had many meetings with EHS in this very room, Doug Pike, and basically was a proponent for forming this local district. And the reason was so that our local residents could help decide the path forward. We went through, it was a miracle that we were formed. We went through a very contentious formation process. Heal the Ocean got very actively involved, and I think we all know them, and we almost didn't get a chance for democracy, but we did. And now our community's been asking this district to not only look at the large gravity system, but step collection and some smaller plants. And our district, I think a week or 2 ago, approved some further study looking at some of those options. I would just encourage our district to make sure that time, I see we have a workshop in another couple weeks. I would give you pause so that this board can understand the information in those studies, because we're at a critical juncture that our community needs to be behind whatever solution, not outside influences, whoever they may be or whatever they may be, but this community needs to want the system that's right for Los Olivos to take care of the groundwater issue and to ensure we don't have massive development in our little town and to ensure success, not failure. And so I've asked for your support, and I worked with Larry Fay and predecessors and folks at the regional board and staff, and I understand most of those folks are retired. So just appreciate all the years of working together, and these guys are they're on the precipice of success or failure, and we want to push them. We want to push them to success. Do I have any more time? That's all I got.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Thank you. And on the phone we have Anna Marie Scott?
Good evening, board members. I'm just following up regarding 2 emails that I sent just before this meeting this evening. The first actually has to do with the workshop that is scheduled for January 24th. As I said in the previous meeting on December 30th, the chart that was provided to the board and the community regarding the traditional system, the step system, the MBRs, and the passive systems, is inaccurate. Specifically, the information that has been obtained and presented to you is almost entirely inaccurate regarding the Presby and Elgin systems. We have never had a presentation by a representative from either of those companies. And I really urge the board to have one before the 24th, on the 24th, or change the workshop date of the 24th. Because we have had someone from Aramco present information about Advantech and Prelos. We've had someone for Cosina do a presentation. And we've had this Stantec design received, which there are some significant issues with. A quote from the Presby and Elgin representative after reading that design information said, "I came away with many questions and concerns, and many of them unrelated to the treatment systems. A major example is the expected projected flow and capacity requirement. Even Guy told me that he has serious questions about it. I didn't see where the consultants convincingly showed what the design capacity really needs to be. You can't design a system or properly estimate costs if you don't know the capacity. But it also affects decision-making related to the chosen sites, collection, dispersal methods, and approaches. Fresh eyes really need to look at the project and see what is optimum for the community." He further goes on to say, "There is quite a bit more that seems to be unanswered or not adequately answered. And it strikes me that there is a headlong rush to do something and potentially taking a path that will be regretted." Now, given that and the information that I forwarded you tonight, which clearly shows that the information on that chart that has been presented repeatedly to the board and not changed to actually reflect accurate information, I really think that you need, and the community
Thank you, Ms. Gott.
needs,
Thank you,
a
Ms. Gott.
workshop on the passive system that I think
Our next speaker is Mr. Rohr. Paul Rohr.
know about.
Paul Rohr, your time starts. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here, and thank you to EHS and Water Board folks for showing up. We looked at your letters. We looked at the 2010, which I think is the most recent wastewater management plan, and we're hoping you guys can, maybe answer some questions and help us out. So, I think in my mind, one of the things that comes up is the letters themselves really don't offer us a lot of guidance, right? It's kind of generalities, septic tanks can suck, they get old, they can be expensive, it's stuff that we sort of know. The 2010 report, I think, is a little bit more helpful, and it really gives us some guidance as to what the regulations are. So my understanding is, right, that what you guys are concerned about are nitrate levels in the upper region, in the potable water area of about 22 units or above, and the goal being that nothing gets into the water to take the water above 10 units, which I don't think we've had any issue with in any of those wells. So it seems like it's a performance standard. Now, what you've looked at is you said, from experience, we can deduce or we can assume that you will have performance issues if you have lots that are smaller than 2.5 acres, etc. Right? But all this really comes down to a performance standard, right? What is the nitrate level in the water? And this is where I start to get concerned, because I just get afraid that we're a solution out there looking for a problem. Right? Because when I look at the tests, we have some tests, from 40 years ago now, and one of those tests, 1 out of a dozen, showed water that was above the acceptable level. That seems like it's not good, but that was 40 years ago. So it could be better, it could be worse, I don't know, I gotta tell you, 40 years ago it was a lot different. I think I listened to the B-52s then. But, they were current. So that was a long time. More recently, right, we've had 2 new tests. Now, those 2 new tests were both at the northern edge of the Los Olivos area. One of which I think came in at 2.2 units, and I think the other at 10. So both of them were compliant. But again, that adds to more questions. I mean, one, right, we don't know, is there some non-compliant area, right? Because no one's ever tested it for 40 years. So that seems like an issue. And 2, we see 10 units coming in at the north of town. That makes me wonder, where does it come from? And is there something north of town that needs to be regulated or that needs to be involved in a sort of cleanup process?
Thank you, Mr. Rourke.
Because, thank you.
Thank you very much. And at the end of public comment, Mr. Savage? To say I'm maybe a little disappointed that Pedro Garcia here from ID1, probably the happiest man in the room with where Lake Cachuma is. So.
Yeah.
Okay, no public comment on that. Mr. Savage, do you want to kick off our workshop and introduce our guests then?
Yes, I will. Thank you. Just a second, I'll come up front. All right, good. I'm going to stand over here. Actually, let me stand close to the microphone because it's there for people. Stand right here. Okay, so first, a little bit about what we're going to do tonight, and then I'll introduce everybody. So the agenda tonight, we're going to do the workshop. We're going to take about a 5-minute break, kind of shuffle things just ever so slightly, allow me to get up front. These guys will take off, which will be good for them. Then we're going to have the regular meeting. Okay, so that's what we're up to tonight. Here's the official agenda. So I'm gonna introduce some folks. We're gonna talk a little bit about things like, or they're gonna talk a little bit about things like benefits of community wastewater systems, funding opportunities, steps and timing, and that sort of stuff through their presentations. So with that, let me introduce people. So if you could raise your hand. So Lars Seifert from Environmental Health Services, the director there. Jason Johnson here, closest to me, supervising environmental health specialist. I'll start with Jane Gray. She's the chair of the Central Coast Water Board, and Taya Tryon, the assistant executive officer, number 2 at the Regional Water Board. So that's who is here in front of us. Primarily going to be Jason and Taya doing presentations, and I think Taya is going to go first. Regarding questions, we're going to ask you to hold them till the end. I've got cards. There's also cards by both doors if you have questions. And we'll take those in and feed them back to people in that fashion. And if you don't have a card and you want one, just raise your hand, I'll bring you a couple. So with that, let me get Taya's presentation.
So while guys bring up the presentation, good evening everyone. My name is Taya Tryon. I'm the assistant executive officer, Central Coast Water Board. I'm a hydrogeologist by training. I've been at the Water Board for about 20 years, and I'm here tonight to help explain some of our positions on septic systems and Los Olivos. And I know that some of you are very knowledgeable and know this stuff technically, but I'm going to be presenting with the understanding that some people might not know some of the details of the risks of septic systems. So bear with me if you are very knowledgeable about this. It's going to be a little bit more basic probably for you, but I think it's important to explain for all levels of understanding. So with that, I'll get started. I have to wear my glasses. So Central Coast Regional Regional Water Quality Control Board is a state regulatory agency, and its remaining responsibility is to protect water quality. There are 9 regional water boards and a state water resources control board that regulate water quality in California. The Porter-Cologne Act is the law that governs water regulation, water quality regulation in California, and gives the Central Coast Water Board the authority to regulate all discharges of waste that threaten to affect the quality of surface water and groundwater. So disposal of wastewater is one of those types of waste that we regulate, and it's done by issuance of permits that include requirements that ensure that when the wastewater is disposed, that it's done in such a manner that's protective of water quality, the environment, and public health. So the Central Coast Water Board issues permits for a wide range of wastewater disposal discharges, including individual septic systems, community wastewater treatment facilities, and even the really large wastewater treatment plants that can discharge millions of gallons of treated water to either surface water or to land. So even though the Central Coast Water Board does have the authority to prohibit discharge of waste from septic systems, and we would require we could require a community to find an alternative disposal method, such as installing a sewer collection system and a wastewater treatment plant, we prefer not to invoke that authority. We prefer to see communities support each other and coordinate with each other to address their wastewater needs so that they can keep local control of their wastewater services. So I'm here today to strongly encourage the community to support the Community Services District project to build a community wastewater reclamation facility. The time is now, and I will go over why there's an urgency and that we need to move forward with an alternative wastewater management strategy in Los Olivos. Next slide, please. So the impacts and risks of groundwater from septic systems in Los Olivos have been known since the 70s. In 1974, the Santa Barbara County Board of Supervisors designated Los Olivos as a special problem area for septic systems, and the county has since conducted several studies evaluating and supporting the implementation of a community wastewater system. Between 1977 and 1980, Santa Barbara County and Central Coast Water Board staff collected water samples from wells at depths between 100 to 125 feet below ground surface, and it was discovered that levels of nitrates were considerably higher in the downtown area compared to areas of gradient. In 1989, the Central Coast Water Board identified Los Olivos as an area needing wastewater management planning, and in 2003, Santa Barbara County conducted a septic system survey and again identified Los Olivos, an area with a high risk for septic system pollution to groundwater and surface water. Next slide, please. So because groundwater pollution from septic systems is a significant statewide issue, the State Water Resources Control Board has a specific policy for the operation and management of septic systems. The latest version of this policy was adopted in April 2018 and is referred to as the On-Site Wastewater Treatment System Policy. And an on-site wastewater treatment system is essentially a septic tank, or septic system, sorry. So the statewide policy establishes a set of specific standards for siting, design, operation, and maintenance of septic systems. And the Central Coast Water Board is required to ensure that these standards are met to ensure protection of water quality and public health. Now the policy also allows a local agency, such as the Santa Barbara County Public Health Department, to develop a customized management program that addresses the conditions specific to their jurisdiction, as long as the minimum requirements that are set in the statewide policy are met. The Central Coast Water Board approved one of those customized management programs that is referred to as the Santa Barbara County Local Agency Management Program, or LAMP. And the program went into effect at the beginning of 2016, and it was later updated in 2018. And it essentially gives the Santa Barbara County Environmental Health Services the delegated authority to oversee the regulation and management of septic systems, and it prevents individual homeowners from having to receive individual permits from the Central Coast Water Board. Now, Santa Barbara County is here tonight, and they will talk a little bit more about the details of the specific requirements for septic systems in accordance with the new policy. Next slide. Like I mentioned, this might be boring for some of you that are very well versed in septic systems, but I'll go ahead anyway. So how do septic systems pollute groundwater and surface water? Well, the wastewater that's generated in the home drains to the septic tank. The septic tank allows the solids to settle, and then the liquid portion of the wastewater is then discharged to a leach field, which is shown in the upper area there. Maybe Guy, you can circle it for me. There we go. And ideally, there's plenty of room to put a properly sized leach field that spreads the liquid wastewater via piping into the subsurface. Wastewater is percolated into the subsurface, and pollutants such as bacteria and nitrates move downward through the unsaturated soil, or not the wet soil, or where the water is, and where it'll attenuate before it reaches groundwater. But if there isn't enough room for a leach field, seepage pits or dry wells are typically installed, and they can concentrate the wastewater and don't allow as much attenuation necessary to reduce the pollutants. And then over time, the pollutants end up in drinking water wells. So in the next slide, I'm going to summarize some of those compounding high risk factors that the septic systems in Los Olivos have caused to impact groundwater. Unfortunately, the Los Olivos community has high risk factors that will result in continued impacts to groundwater and potentially surface water from the septic systems. Even the status quo of maintaining the current amount of septic systems is not a viable solution. One of the highest risk factors in the high density is the high density of septic systems. Los Olivos has approximately 2/3 of the lots that are less than ½ an acre, and many are less than 1/4 of an acre. And in accordance with the state water board policy to be protective of groundwater quality from pathogen and nitrate pollution, there should be only one septic system every 2.5 acres. So with the small lots, there isn't enough spreading of the wastewater discharges in a given area. Another reason why small lots result in high risk to water quality is because there isn't enough room on small lots to install those properly sized leach fields. So the wastewater can be dispersed to the subsurface with the right amount of attenuation. So due to the lack of space for properly sized leach fields, many of the Los Olivos lots have seepage pits and dry wells. And also, if soils are unfavorable for percolation, that's usually when seepage pits are also installed. And then based on the 2003 County Septic System Survey, approximately 2/3 of the surveyed systems utilized dry wells and seepage pits in Los Olivos. And this is problematic because this wastewater is concentrated and it doesn't have enough time to attenuate, and it pollutes the groundwater. And in fact, with the shallow groundwater in Los Olivos, some of these seepage pits are actually having the sewage discharged directly into groundwater. Another risk factor is the age that was mentioned earlier today. Most of the systems are probably around 30 years old, and a typical lifespan of a properly functioning septic system is about 40 years. So it's anticipated that failures are going to start happening with many of the systems, and the requirements for repairs and maintenance are different now with the new updated LAMP, or Local Agency Management Program. And the repairs are going to be very costly, and the county is going to describe that in a little bit more detail so that you can get an understanding of the costs and the requirements. So based on the new requirements, the installation of new systems on new lots may either not be allowed or be so stringent that it be very, very costly for individual homeowners. So lastly, there's always the surfacing of wastewater that can pollute surface water, but also polluted groundwater that discharges into or recharges the surface water body can also cause that pollution. And that's seen in many areas of the state and that have been identified. So in the past, Los Olivos did have some shallower drinking water wells. And those wells had to be abandoned and deeper wells installed to have cleaner groundwater. And it's only a matter of time before continued operation of these septic systems are going to impact your current drinking water wells. In fact, as mentioned earlier today, too, a recent groundwater sample collected around 100 feet below ground surface from a recently installed groundwater monitoring well showed that concentrations near downtown are already at a level that's considered unsafe to drink. And it is expected that the concentrations are even worse further down gradient from downtown. Based on these risks and existing water quality data, the community can't depend on the status quo of continued use of septic systems. An alternative method of managing the wastewater is needed to protect drinking water. There is a solution for Los Olivos, and that is installing a sewer collection system and operating a community wastewater reclamation facility that will provide both water quality and water supply benefits. Reducing the nitrate discharges from the septic system is necessary to protect drinking water supplies, and this can be done by having this community's wastewater discharged to a sewer system that takes the wastewater to one location where it will be properly treated and disposed of and recycled for beneficial uses so that you can become a drought-resistant community. Recycled water can be used to irrigate landscapes. It can recharge the aquifers so that you are becoming more drought resilient, as aligned with the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, which is required to implement the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and that this is one of the solutions for being more ready for drought impacts. And the timing for funding to build a community wastewater reclamation facility is very opportune at the moment. I've never seen this much money available for these types of projects. Wastewater and water supply infrastructure funding is currently available both from federal and state programs, but everybody's looking to tap into those funds, and so the time is now. Apply now, and because the availability of funding is decreasing month by month, and that's why there's urgency to do this work and to apply for that funding. And we also strongly recommend that the community act now and work towards owning and operating a community wastewater reclamation facility to maintain local control over your community's wastewater services and not to give up that control to the county or the Central Coast Water Board. So in addition, as the county will discuss, compliance with the local agency management program for individual homeowners for septic systems is going to be pricey, and continued use of the individual septic systems are not viable. So an alternative way of managing the wastewater, therefore, is by supporting the Community Services District to build their community wastewater reclamation facility so that you don't spend, the individual homeowners don't spend a lot of money fixing their septic systems when then later on they have to connect to a sewer and spend money to do that. So I encourage you to be a community that is drought resilient. We support the Los Olivos Community Services District in building this reclamation facility because it's important to protect water quality, not just for you, but also for future generations. And that is the mission of the Central Coast Water Board, and that is why we're here to support this project tonight, to explain the needs. Again, the time is now to obtain state and federal funding and to continue to work towards local control and working together and supporting each other. And again, the status quo of continued use of septic systems is not viable, and the Central Coast Water Board would like to see a collaborative solution moving forward so we don't have to exercise our authority and prohibit the discharge of wastewater from septic systems. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jason, who's going to talk a little bit more about the LAMP requirements for septic systems if they were to fail at the present moment to be in compliance with the policy.
While Guy gets the slides up, Thank you, Taya. I do want to point out that despite all the recent rainfall, we're still in a drought, so conservation is still important. Hopefully we get more rain, just a little slower when it continues this year, but conservation activities are still needed. As Taya mentioned, under the state policy, the LAMP implements the tier 2 of that policy. There's various tiers within the state policy. Tier 1 is the standard conventional system. Tier 2 is the LAMP level. And then there's more stringent levels, 3 and 4. I believe 0 is repair of existing systems and informative failures. In the county, the LAMP is then codified in County Code, Chapter 18C, Article 1. And that incorporates the California Plumbing Code and the state policy as they're not defined in that county code chapter. I want to note that most systems that were constructed prior to 2016, when the LAMP went into effect, won't be in conformance with current code, which was adopted to protect groundwater. And current requirements include the installation of supplemental treatment systems during the replacement of dispersal fields, and for newer modified systems that are within a special problems area and parcels less than 2.5 acres, and in some other situations. Individual systems with supplemental treatment systems that are installed for replacing an existing system, while they make an improvement, a community solution would provide the greatest improvement to the groundwater and the local area. Look at the next slide. So an estimated cost to install a supplemental treatment system, including a single dispersal field, is in the range of $30,000 to $70,000. This was a few months ago when we asked a couple different contractors what costs were, just in general in the county. Every site's different, both size as well as soils. An existing system, which is part of why that range is so large. As was previously mentioned, a lot of the lots in Los Olivos are very small, where a properly sized leach field for even a 3-bedroom home isn't feasible. And depending on where the lot's located and where groundwater is, seepage pits may not be feasible. There are spots in Los Olivos where groundwater is as shallow as 15 feet or less, so a seepage pit isn't feasible. You need 10 feet of separation. Seepage pits are below 10 feet, so it just doesn't work. Where you can't have a feasible system, you have a more complex system. It may include disinfection, restricted flow from that residence or business to that system, including metering to verify flow isn't exceeded, hauling in of wastewater to an approved receiving facility like a wastewater treatment plant, or some other engineered solution for the inadequate dispersal area. Also, for supplemental treatment systems, a notice of property owner is recorded onto the title of that parcel, noting that during the permitting construction process, noting an operating permit, regular monitoring of that system to verify its function in accordance with the manufacturer's requirements and its certification, maintenance of the system, and then reporting of both those servicing and the effluent it's producing. So these are the operation and maintenance costs related to it and the different items. Unlike your typical conventional septic system, which is your tank and dispersal field, generally it's all gravity flow. You don't have pumps, you don't have any electronics or anything related to it. Supplemental treatment systems in general have an additional tank that goes from an anaerobic septic system to an aerobic system, which provides that higher level of treatment to further treat the wastewater. Because there's either pumps or blowers, There's the operating permit to verify for the reporting. Currently, that's a 5-year permit for $324. The regional board permits for a system like this are, I think, closer to $1,600 to $1,800 a year. This fee was established about 3 to 4 years ago when there was no data, so it was based on cost to review pump reports. That number is based on cost recovery, so the next fee study, that number could change, and but inflation, it's more than likely going to go up like everything else everyone's experiencing. The systems have a service contract required both by the manufacturer, the land, and county code. Different systems have different frequencies, but in general, they're all twice a year, 6-month intervals. Current costs for a residential system are about $800 to $1,200 a year, as well as effluent sampling to verify that the system is actually treating the wastewater to that manufacturer's specifications, which also leads to whether or not there needs to be an adjustment on the system. Some systems are generally just blowers and a media. Others have textile fabrics, and so they have pumps that kind of like drip water or the effluent onto those textile medias. So different ones have different servicing and repair costs. And because these systems have the septic tank and then the treatment tank, and the treatment tank is generally just a liquid media, they require pumping the septic tank at a frequency by the manufacturer, so it's actually measuring the sludge and solids level, and at a certain level the manufacturer requires that the tank be pumped. So while the tank is supposed to be inspected or checked for levels, it's not pumped every year. We recommend every 3 to 5 years for just a standard septic tank, because you don't want both sludge and solids going down the dispersal field, because that's what will kill your dispersal field, because it'll physically gum up or fill those pore spaces. With supplemental treatment systems, it's about every 5 years or less, depending on flow to the system. And then, as I mentioned, moving parts, so there's adjustments, parts need to be repaired or replaced, and that's all based on cost of the parts, labor, and what actually is going on. And then most of the systems have pumps, and so you have electrical charges, and then they all have a communication monitoring alarm and notify the owner and provider if the pump's not running or the blower's not working. So just with the cost, not including repairs or the monitoring charges, it's about $1,500 to $1,900 a year, or $125 to $159 a month for those ongoing costs. Some years may be less, some may be more, depending on if the tank needs to be pumped. We talked about constrained sites earlier. And it was mentioned that in the state policy, it's 2.5 acres, and that Los Olivos, many are much smaller. This is the setback table showing the various setbacks from septic components to various other septic components and or wells, property line structures. As you can see, some setbacks are greater, some are less. For the really small lots in Los Olivos, some are about 40 feet by 140 feet in size. And a lot of those ones have a home taking up about half of the parcel. And it's usually not right at the property boundary. It's set back, so that doesn't leave that much space to install anything. Especially because where the existing dispersal field is, you can't put a new one there. So you lose that space too, even if it's not developed at ground level. As an example, using couple different percolation tests from different spots in the community. A 3-bedroom residence would require 583 to 3,750 square feet of absorption area. There's a little math that goes from there to figure out the linear feet, but that equates to about 84 to 535 linear feet of leach line, which is on this chart is disposal field. Some things to note is that the max length of the line is 100 feet, and you can see the various setbacks. Even at 83 feet on some of these developed small parcels, you can't even get 83 feet in, even if you're in 20 or 30 foot leach lines, because they're all spaced out. So the narrowest you can have 2 lines next to each other is 8 feet on center or 5 feet edge to edge. The typical trench is 3 feet. So if you had 2 40-foot lines, that's 40 feet in length, and then 11 feet in width, and then you're still having to meet these various setbacks. So in that case, it's basically infeasible to install leach lines, which leads to seepage pits. And if groundwater is shallow at 15 feet or less, then a seepage pit's not feasible, and you don't have space for dispersal, which is one of the reasons we support the CSDs and the community's effort to actually come up with a community solution to handle wastewater. And that's it for these. I have some other slides if there's questions on what is a conventional septic system, what's it kind of look like in visual, if it's needed.
I just wanted to quickly just follow up with Jason. I mean, part of this is we wanted to kind of, many people don't have all the information as far as, what a septic system entails, the limitations of that, the site constraints, the challenges that we see on the regulatory side, because we get the projects that come in, we get the kind of the frustrated resident, we get the frustrated homeowner and the contractor all trying to figure out what do we do. We're in a situation where we were kind of dealt a hand, and the hand doesn't give us a lot of options when it comes to septic systems. And that's just one piece of it. So then what happens is we get to a point where we're trying to enhance the treatment, because you're trying to make a bad situation a little better. But in doing so, we're still not getting to the point that Tea's making, is that even those efforts on an individual basis are not avoiding the impacts to groundwater quality too, which is also a bigger, longer term issue. So, at the county, we're trying to, meet construction standards. We're trying to make it work so, you can go in and flush your toilet and be, sound, have some peace of mind that you're not immediately polluting the groundwater. But each of those individual systems taken together collectively becomes a problem for groundwater quality impacts. And that's where, we might solve a little problem on a little lot, but when we start stepping back and looking at the whole, and that's what the regional board is kind of stepping back and looking at the whole, and I think the community services district is starting to look at the whole, is those individual solutions on individual lots don't add up to a solution that is going to protect the groundwater for long term. And so I think that's sort of the message that we wanted to kind of convey, is that it's complicated to even solve the individual problem, but that doesn't get us to, I think, as a community, where we need to look at for solving the bigger problem and protecting the groundwater for the long term. So I just wanted to kind of follow up with that thought. And we're certainly available to answer any questions, and I think that
Bucket cards, people.
So what are you supposed to write on here? Do we actually have to write up?
So Guy, while you're collecting those, let's allow the board to ask any questions, and again, thank you. Well, I want to say thank you to the regional board and county HS again for coming here, because I think at several board meetings we've been talking about the concerns and the view of the regional board. And I've been uncomfortable saying that and would like you to say it in front of our community, so I appreciate you being here, taking time out of your night to be here with us, so thank you for that. Maybe there, before we get to public questions, we can start with questions from the board. We might have Director Kennedy, anything?
Yeah, I actually had a few questions, and we'll probably have more questions as we keep going, but let's see, we can get a start here. So thank you again very much for coming and providing all this information. It's obviously really helpful. So we're obviously trying to solve this, crack this nut. I mean, we have a lot of issues. We don't have a lot of land. We don't have a lot of space to work with. And yes, we have all these small lots. We have aging septic systems, et cetera. And you know, it's also costly. You have 400-ish parcels, and so people are not going to vote for something if it's going to mean they're going to see a significant increase in their taxes and or additional monthly expense, et cetera. This is a big challenge. So it's really, I think, important, and what we've been trying to do is look at all the alternatives that make sense for this community and factoring in all these different things. So I hear what you're saying, and I hear a lot about a singles collection system, gravity-fed sewer. I'm just hoping, curious, are we open to other possibilities? Maybe it's a hybrid. We've been looking at the step system as a possibility for this community. But I know there's some properties that have something like that in. So one question is there an openness to that in terms of permitting and us moving forward with that? And then part and parcel with that is we talked a lot about reuse, and we've been talking about that as well, reuse of water and reclamation. And so, I mean, I could see a scenario where if a homeowner had something, he's in those lots where it makes sense, a step system, for example, could they treat and reuse that water on their property? I understand that there's the monitoring and the testing that has to take place to make sure that system continues to function properly, but is that also something that we could look at? Because the reason why I say that is that, to me, accomplishes a couple of things. I'm hoping it's a lower cost, but if we're reusing the water, which is beneficial for everyone, for irrigation, et cetera, but it also would minimize the amount of effort of central collection. I mean, again, the downtown, the smaller lots, yes, likely to have to collect that and centrally treat it. But if we, on the outer line larger lots, could have something that was on site, and those homeowners have the ability and could reuse that water, that significantly reduces that overhead of of the collection and treatment and then disposal. Is that in the realm of possibility? And then a couple of just other.
Do you want to stop
No,
and
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I don't know
And-
jumping in. I don't know if it's all at once or not.
Well, I think if I could clarify what you're saying on the reuse, you're not talking about step, because that's untreated. It's a advanced onsite.
No.
Well, yeah, I know.
Because I can tell you they're not gonna let us take
Well,
step discharge and use it.
Correct.
No,
However,
but
there is,
step can be treated.
however, there is, the ability to add on a pump that would, I'm going to mischaracterize this, but you can add on to that you could treat that water so that you could reuse it for irrigation on a property, as opposed to essentially collecting everything, treating it, and then figuring out where to disperse it.
So again, you're talking about an advanced on-site system.
No, like the preload system, for example, which has a component that you can have on top of that tank that would allow you to treat that effluent.
Well, we can't mandate a solution for it right now, obviously.
Right.
I mean, we could, but we don't want to do that, right? We really want local control. Right? So I think you need to go through some scenario finding and feasibility analysis as it relates to what are the opportunities that are best suited to the community. I'm not an engineer, and I'll have Taya and Lars obviously speak to this. But it seems like there's some cost constraints too. So if you're looking at a smaller collection system with fewer properties, then you have more of an economic burden on that smaller area too. So I think that's, you know, a cost consideration as well. But again, we can't specify at this point the manner of compliance unless you're in a different situation, which we don't want to get to. Yeah.
Yeah, so Jane's right. We can't specify how you come into compliance. What we do is we work with you, you come up with a plan. The plan hasn't really been detailed. And so it's difficult for us to say what would work, what wouldn't work until we have more of a design that we can evaluate.
And on-site reclamation also comes with its own cost burden as well. So that's something else to consider.
And I do want to point out that STEP is still a centralized collection system. It's just not gravity, but it is still centralized, so it's so gravity, it's a force main basically from different, yeah, so I mean your tanks on the property,
Right.
effluent still pumped to a central treatment system for further processing.
And
There's-
oh, sorry. Go ahead. I mean, and certainly certain situations lend themselves well to what they call, you know, a step or a pressurized lift system, you know, particularly when there's you know, gravity constraints and things like that for the part of the design. But you are then having to kind of consider as part of the design the operation and maintenance costs of those individual tanks and pumps, essentially like lift stations on individual properties. So, you know, when you get into the design and cost comparisons, does it make sense to, you know, have decentralized lift stations that are managed by, you know, the district and the cost associated with that in partnership with the individual, you know, homeowners. But then there's some offset and basically lateral costs for installation too. So a large gravity main is sometimes more expensive to install than a smaller pressure pipe. So there's some trade-offs there, and I don't think that, you know, it still goes back to that centralized collection. So I certainly think that there's areas for design parameters in the solution you come up with, and I think we'll all be flexible with that. As far as the reuse of on-site non-potable reuse or for irrigation or things, there are some state legislative restrictions on that. There's a bill that was passed in California fairly recently that essentially limits what you can do with basically reclamation of water on the property. And it basically it restricts it from residential properties altogether. Basically you'd have to have multifamily or commercial. There's some standards that the state is developing for those, but it's not applicable to residential properties from my understanding of the bill. And there are treatment and design standards associated with that as well, and those have yet to be promulgated or developed by the State Water Board. They're still in the process, but that comes with a cost of treatment and maintenance and oversight similar to supplemental treatment systems. So what we've seen is you know, for those on-site reclamation uses, you're essentially doing a wastewater treatment reclamation plant on your property again still. You reduce the amount of water going off-site in those cases, but you're shifting a lot of those costs and maintenance and design to the property. But there are current restrictions on residential reuse.
And we're not there by a long shot on moving forward with those regulations. There are far too many risks to advance that forward.
And I also want to mention that individual homeowners are not eligible for funding from the state or the feds, as far as I know, from different pots of money. And so coming together as a CSD to apply for those, that's your best bet. And the larger your system is to address the issues in the area, the more likely the funding will be.
But I think we clearly want to work with the community is the larger point. But we do need something that we can react to. We do need sort of scenarios and feasibility opportunities to react to that provide us with enough of the granular detail that we can give you good feedback.
guess I just wanted to reiterate this. You're not trying to tell us we have to do it in gravity-fed system. You're just trying to tell us, here's the problem, and here's why we have a problem. And this is what we need you to address as a board, as a community, to protect our groundwater. You're not saying that the only solution really is a gravity-fed system that you have to do. But here's the issues that you need to address for us to be able to say you're compliant.
Right, and that's that compliance component that we're getting to, right? There does need to be a community-wide solution, because without...
We can't say we think it's okay. You have to say, yes, it's okay before we can implement it and get the funding.
Well, not necessarily, but, I mean, first of all, we think you should start getting in line for some funding, right? Just start reaching out to funding agencies, create that dialogue, build those relationships, because it takes a while to get funding. You're going to need to go through your CEQA process, finish your design process, go through the permitting process. That doesn't happen overnight.
But we don't have to have a final approved design then to get funding.
You will at some point, but you ought to start that dialogue
But I mean,
now.
just to start
Yeah,
the process.
because the bipartisan infrastructure law, the IRA, that money's going to move pretty quickly. That's at the federal level. Obviously, a lot of that's going to come through state board, through the SRF funding program, so low interest loans. If you're not a disadvantaged community, your MHI is much higher than the median household income for a disadvantaged community. So you're looking at low interest loans, but the sooner you can start dialoguing with funding entities, really the better. And go ahead, Nancy.
Yeah, and you don't really want to ask for funding for a project that is not going to be, is not going to be issued for. So it's like a combined effort. We would support the community in those discussions with the state water board, funding opportunities to support you and be part of the solution. But again, until we have something that we can provide feedback on, there's nothing, we can't tell you how to do it. We just telling you.
We can come to you along the way and say, okay, well, I think this is pretty good. What do you think? No, or yes, it looks great. You're willing to work with this and that.
Yeah, but I think we're not going to dialogue for 5 years or 10 years, right?
Correct.
And I think, I mean, just to be really clear, we want to start this dialogue. We want to support the community, but there does need to be sort of an endpoint.
Yeah, soon.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
We've been trying to support and work with the community for a while.
No, it's an important question, certainly, because again, we don't want to assert authority. We're not interested in bludgeoning people. That's not what we like to do.
A little pressure.
Well, but let's talk. I think we need to have a productive dialogue.
So I don't think we're looking for a mandate, but we would love to hear information that would help us to decide what we want to do. So in this great state of California or Central California, are there any other Los Olivos situations out there that you're aware of? That you could say, here's a community that's a little bit bigger than yours, but they're looking at this and heading toward this, so with some ideas as to what may be working for other people or what has worked over the last few years.
So
Excuse me. Go ahead.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. It's really difficult to hear the board members because they're not close enough to the mic. So could I just make a request that when they make a comment or ask a question that might be closer to them or they come up to the mic? Thank you.
Okay, I just asked about whether there might be some other communities doing the same kind of thing we've learned from in this area.
There are, and if you're interested in learning a little bit more about those, I'm going to have to talk to my staff and get a list together.
Well, Mark brought up Los Osos, right? You don't want to go to Los Osos route.
No.
I
Right.
intentionally did not say Los
But that, so again, you have to come around a community solution. I mean, certainly, we have a lot of, so Central Coast, is a large region, right? And there's a lot of really small communities with small systems. Another sort of difficult situation was Morro Bay and Cayucos. They certainly already had systems in place, but very small communities that had to overcome 10 years of battling, and now they have really great wastewater treatment systems themselves in those really tiny communities. I mean, Morro Bay is one of, very fixed income, very small community. Again, they had a consolidated system. They needed to retreat from the coastline, and they had to come to those solutions themselves, so they had to build their own separate systems. So
It's 3 times the size of Los Olivos.
it's certainly, but you can find a solution that's right size for your
Right,
community.
that's
I think
what I'm
is
saying.
I think
That's
is the
not
point.
that fit, but
Right,
I
but
think
that's
we
sort
can
of,
be more creative than that.
that's something you can learn from, potentially, right? And these are, they become community pride projects, really.
It should be.
So, Director Ross, do you have any other questions?
Well, just to wrap up, so if we can learn something from other people, great, and if we do manage to be successful, we would hope other people could learn from it. I'm done.
Sorry. Speak up, Tom.
May I just interject one additional response is, because of the recycled water, because of the drought, there's a lot of new technology and new systems that are being implemented. So you might not necessarily want to look at the older functioning systems. You're going to want to look at what's the new technology. What's
Thank you very
working
much.
well.
You're hired.
Because recycled water is a really important component for this community because of drought issues. And that is also where the funding is. If you have a recycled water component, you're moved up the list in terms of funding.
And priority, absolutely. So I would reach out to the city of Morro Bay, Cayucos Community Services District. Again, larger systems, but there are some parallels and some opportunities to learn about how they have gotten to those conclusions.
So I just wanted to stand to get closer to the mic. So I'm not sure if I heard it stated or not, but I wanted to make sure that I was clear on. So in the event of a step system, we talked about it's an individual lift station, more or less. And there's been discussion about, I think some communities have the community operates those and some don't. Is there a requirement for you that the CSD would have to actually own and operate those, or oversight a type of scenario? Because that makes a big difference. You just don't go on people's property and start digging it up without a lot of work in place. So, however, if it's owned and operated by the individual landowner with oversight requirements, makes it similar in many respects. Do you have any foresight on how you would look at that?
I don't have any, yeah,
Okay,
Is
that was
what-
my guess,
is
but
that
I
what the
wanted to
CSD
know.
would want though? Is
Yeah,
to not have control over those
Well, there's
parts?
different ways of control, and owning a mechanical facility on 400 parcels is a big. It might be. We haven't even talked about the cost of that. So there's problems of actually owning something in somebody's backyard, accessing it when you need to, doing repair work if you have to, and there are. I want to talk with.
yeah, I don't know how we permit that, Tom. I think we need, I don't know how we permit that necessarily. I think we need to have some legal advice on that, honestly.
Yeah.
I really don't know what that permitting process would look like.
So you realize the easement.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Easement
but,
is granted.
Right.
Yes.
Not yet.
Yeah,
And
but
so,
if you vote
so
for that, this
we're-
is the system you want, you vote for it, if part of that's part of your vote, that you say, yes, I will grant the easement, because I'm gonna benefit from it.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I've dealt with easements. I hear what, you think the one leads to another, but that's not necessary.
yeah, I think we need a little
Yeah,
bit
well,
more.
so there's some dialogue there, because my thought is that oversight, and monitoring potentially, ownership, I mean, I'm speaking for myself, I've dealt with facilities in people's backyard, and it sounds great when you're not the one that has to do it. Sounds great. Sounds great when you don't, when you're not responsible for that, and they're not digging it up on your yard. So there's a lot to be considered there. The other thing I wanted to confirm what I've heard quite the period of time of talking with the regional board and county EHS is that while we've been trying to make progress and identify a community-wide system and how it's implemented, that while we make that progress, and I think Ms. Gray, you mentioned that while we make that progress, that these regulatory tools that you have, won't be used because you view that they're not necessary, that the community would work on a solution that would then ultimately be implemented. And I think I've represented that at past board meetings, but now with you here in front of us, so am I accurate in that statement? I mean, I think that's what you've been doing for the last couple of years, but, and if the answer is no, then say it.
Well, I don't know, I mean, there does need to be a solution, I think, is really the bottom line, right?
I hear you.
So, yeah, I mean, we have not asserted authority, and I think our preference is to continue to support the community.
But thank you. So that
there's a but in there somewhere.
Yeah, I don't want to keep saying that for you. I want you to say that.
Yeah, I think we would prefer not to assert our authority. That's what
Okay, yeah, I think so. Thank you for that. Mr. Savage.
All right, so I tried to, you just answered some of these questions. I'm going to move over a little closer to the mic, so I'm going to stand right next to you guys. So I tried to arrange these from the very generic to the specific, okay? So first question is related to whether it's the water board or EHS, kind of from your perspective, what's the goal here? Is it to reduce contaminants in the district or in the area, which is a little bit different goal, right? So maybe you can talk about that real quickly. So is the focus the district or special problems area or that?
Overall, our mission is to protect clean water
All of
quality.
the above.
Exactly. We are protective of water quality. I think there's a period there. In the immediate area, we're interested in protecting the water quality in areas where there is that special problems area, where there can be an immediate solution. We know that there's, continue to be degraded water quality, and it's only going to concentrate more.
And we feel that the district and its sort of, umbrella is a big portion of that, and so it's one big player in which, that could be a solution that is under management of the community services district for those weeks. So, that piece of it is going to go a long ways to, prevent degradation of groundwater quality more broadly as well.
And ameliorate the extent water quality issues.
So kind of you touched on this a little bit. Is there a specific urgency to put in a complete system in the entire district, in your opinion, or is the phased approach that's been discussed satisfactory?
Go back to you.
What's the phased approach?
So there's been discussion about doing the downtown core first, and then a portion of the residential that's kind of right around downtown, and then phase 3 would have been the rest of the residential.
And what's your timeline on doing that, and how does that funding work? I mean, to think about, first of all, you can't piecemeal for CEQA, right? So you want to take a whole look at your project altogether, make sure that you're doing your proper environmental review at that time, and then sequencing that project, obviously, so that you're able to enable yourself the funding to move forward. So I think that would be critical.
You want to eat the elephant one bite at a time.
Oh, no, I
Not the
just,
whole
the
thing in one
EHS,
bite.
I'm a
your
vegetarian.
2010,
So
your 2010 report recommended exactly that, to do the downtown commercial core. And then I know you didn't write it, but you
I know what you're saying.
shared before.
The
So it's
phase one is
confusing
still-
to hear now that it's not
Yeah.
feasible, what you laid out isn't feasible.
Well, you didn't say it's not
I didn't say
feasible,
that, yeah.
but the phased approach still had all those things becoming part of the system.
100%,
So
yes.
the CEQA would still be the entire project.
Right.
The
But you
phased approach was, you're not going to dig up every single street at the same day.
Yes.
You're going to construct in phases over a couple, I think it was over a few years. I don't know the report off the top of my
I
head.
do,
But it was going to be.
They actually said
where-
based on groundwater quality monitoring
Okay.
that happened after the commercial core went in. So if that's really not feasible, that's critical information for this community, because that's what we were going off of.
I didn't assert that it was infeasible, but
Okay.
I think you're going to want to analyze things all at once, right? And how you phase that in over time, and how you allocate funding or assume that you're going to apply for funding and get funding to implement over time, I think is really critical.
Mhm.
And again, the higher density lots
Yeah.
are one of the issues. And so the commercial
100%.
core is an issue, but
Mhm.
so are all those others.
Yeah.
So, and if I remember, was it a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, the phase approach changed a little bit to where it was instead of just phase one, maybe phase 1 and 2.
Yeah,
And
well,
phase 3, which was the outskirt, could potentially. So, I mean, the projects evolved in the last 12, 13 years over different, as times have changed. So, how one views the phase approach may be different than the other
mhm.
over this time span. But again, the phase approach still had
100%.
most of the community as part of the system.
A system.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I think when the challenge is then for your rate setting, for your design, for your CEQA, all for your funding applications,
Mhm.
all of those essentially kind of have to envision a whole piece.
Absolutely.
And then how it's constructed is sort of where you get into the phasing and, and that's, from what I've seen of other sewer projects,
Mhm.
it's all looked at, the whole elephant is looked at, the
Mhm.
rates are set, the design is set, the funding is based on that, and then when it comes to construction timing, that's where you look at your phasing, what's more cost effective.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And which area is higher priority?
Right.
Right.
So, to that exact question there, Ted, so what area is higher priority? Where exactly, in your opinion, are the problem sites today?
It's in the high density septic system areas.
So, does that make the downtown the most important, or those smaller lots that are kind of near the downtown?
I'd say both, because they're both discharging wastewater.
I think one of the things I just like to comment, Guy, is that, when you talk commercial versus residential, from a wastewater discharge perspective, sometimes commercial doesn't necessarily produce more wastewater than a residential.
Mhm.
So it depends on what the commercial is. So if you have a commercial that's just a retail with an employee restroom, we size that very differently than we would even a residential system. So we're looking at it from a perspective of discharge of wastewater and how much is going into the ground and what is not treated. And so, it's a difficult question from a technical perspective to say one or the other because it's varied when it comes to commercial uses. And so there's times where we see residential properties that are very high flows as compared to, say, like a retail store. So that needs to be kind of just, a perspective or a lens that I would suggest you kind of keep in mind as these discussions occur. It's not just because it's commercial that it's a higher amount of wastewater or a more, a higher amount of pollutants or nitrates in that wastewater. It really varies across the uses.
And that water's spreading too. It's not,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's, part of it. It's not, that water column is not just staying right there. It's moving around, right? So I think, that it's being shared between commercial and residential, between smaller lots and large lots.
I just want to say on that, that's one of the issues that we're working with on the county, is that while you say, yes, you could have say a wine tasting room that has a bathroom for its employees and maybe guests, guests. And it's zoned a certain zoning, and then that property goes to convert, and we've been talking with Ms. Gray about this, is a real issue because the sizing, and the cost involved. I mean, one of the primary goals we wanted, in forming this as well, is the equity issue. The equity of everybody paying their fair share. And so once there's a connection, what the county can approve or not approve could overwhelm our system and then set up a really inequitable situation that we need to figure that out. I'll continue to ask for your help
Yeah,
on that.
no problem.
To do
It's a
that.
fun one,
Yeah.
Mr. Pickering. Great.
All right, getting down to, Jason, this is probably a question, you touched on it in your presentation. So if someone's in one of the small lots,
Okay.
and their septic system fails, what happens to them and their house?
Who wants to take that? Anybody?
So I mentioned that it's gonna be an engineered system, and it could be, I mean, supplemental treatments obviously can be a part of it. It depends on where groundwater is. Is a seepage pit feasible for that property or not? Seepage pits take up less space because they're vertical, and we didn't touch on it, but one of the leach lines allow for evaporation, and that, I think the slide showed it. It allows for evaporation and percolation. So you have the nitrates, the BOD, the stuff in the liquid, which is one of the issues. But also it's just, where does the liquid go? Some percolates down, some evaporates. Seepage pits, there's no evaporation. It's down a bit. It's gravel filled. It's all anaerobic, which is one of the reasons why supplemental treatment is required pretty much for all seepage pits. A few exceptions, but those are really large lots, is because it goes from anaerobic to aerobic, back to anaerobic. Leach lines, because they're near the surface, have some aerobic treatment along with that, and different bacteria digesting the material helps reduce nitrates and other things also. So if you're on a really small lot, and you have really high groundwater to where you can't do a seepage pit, it's some sort of designed, engineered solution. It may be drip systems, which is still like leach lines. Water has to go somewhere. If you can size how much you can fit on the property, it may be, and again, small lots, so you can't keep adding tanks. So a dose system where you're only allowing 100 gallons a day to go out may not be feasible because you don't have the space to add another tank to do a dose system. But it could be you're only allowed to discharge 100 gallons a day. I don't know if anyone has an idea of what a typical household uses. I know just because I have a meter at my house. Some days we only have 2 kids, so on some days we only use like 60, 70 gallons. If we do all our laundry in one day, which you probably can't do here because you're on a septic system, we can use 600 gallons if we're doing laundry from 6 to 8. So, and so it's just one of those things of it'll be restricted flow out to your system via pump, via hauling. It really just depends on what that site allows.
I mean, typically rule of thumb is 55 gallons per day per person, right? That's what typically folks use.
So to add on to that, a couple of pieces to this, and I think, if you have an existing use, we're going to work with that property owner and their contractor and designer to put in a system that conforms to the greatest extent possible. That's going to involve treatment. It may only be a partial system, so there's going to be some, maybe it only lasts half of what a typical system lasts. It may, like you said, it may be the kind of on the property owner's then responsibility to limit their use or spread their use, but you're going to be working with kind of a limping system to begin with, and it's going to be costly to install. So you're not even going to get a whole system, but it's still going to be like really expensive. What happens then is basically we get to the point where if it's not working and it becomes a public health threat, then there's avenues in which we basically can mandate either removal of the wastewater or even to the extent that you could have to vacate the house. We don't typically get there because we're not usually in that dire of a situation. But there are, we can't have a public health hazard from wastewater discharges. So that is ultimately, at the end of the day, we have to cease that. And if you can't do it through technology or a partial system or a non-conforming system, or then we get to the point where we're going to have to make some hard decisions about what that use on the property is. The other piece is then if it's, for instance, on like some of these commercial lots where there's a allotted use for the property through like a planning permit or there's a conditional use permit or something like that, some of those uses could be scaled back or actually revoked because they couldn't be supported. So those are usually conditions of that permit and use, is to say, okay, I can do a wine tasting room with the bathrooms. Well, you get to the point where you can't put that wastewater somewhere then we, as the county, may have to look at that use permit and say, okay, well, that was predicated on you being able to dispose of your wastewater. So if you can't do that, then we start scaling back on what the allotted uses are. So residential is a little bit different than commercial, and there may be some different tools, but at the end of the day, it has to go in the ground, it has to be, treated, and, it may get to where it's only a partial system, and that, is then, it devalues the property, it limits the longevity of that system. It may be something that has to be repaired more frequently. And, that just adds costs. So, that's sort of where we get to, and it's kind of on an individual basis, but it's, there are all of those tools available to have to start scaling things back.
So there are a couple of questions here kind of related to supplemental systems, aka advanced on-site, as we've been describing them in meetings here. So it was mentioned that the status quo is not acceptable. Does that mean that advanced on-site systems are also not acceptable for homes on less than 2.5 acres?
The status quo, how it is right now, is not a viable solution. There's already demonstrated water quality impacts, and so things need to change to protect water quality.
So the second half of that had to do with advanced on-site or supplemental systems on lots less than what the land would suggest. Is that status quo, or is that, how's that?
That is status quo. We don't think for a lot of the areas that it's going to be able to treat the supplemental and treat it to the point where it's protective enough of water quality.
If I can say that the other way around, so if you've got 2.5 acres or more, that would not be status quo? Because you could use an advanced on-site system? I think that's
Not a
what the
preferred
question is.
option. I think
That's
the
what
simple answer, just cut to the chase, is that we're already on substandard lots. We're already, working in situations that are really not protective of water quality. So it's not our preferred solution, and I would say not a great option.
But from a local regulatory perspective, those lots that are over 2.5 acres don't require advanced systems right now, right? And because basically it's a density issue. So you're loading nitrates into the groundwater, and if it's more dense than that, then you're increasing the amount of nitrates in the groundwater. And so, that's why we have those different standards, is because you're concentrating the amount of nitrate loading on the groundwater if it's less than 2.5 acres.
You mentioned nitrates. There's a question in here about nitrates. Somebody wanted to know what level is acceptable, and is that level due to change anytime soon?
It'll get more restrictive as time moves on, if anything, really.
And so
As we see, so it's, the MCL is 10
For drinking water.
for drinking water, that's correct.
But, and for the aquifer testing, the deeper aquifer testing, it's what? The trigger point, there's a action level 22 or something around 22.5.
So
That's half the MCL. If you look at nitrate as nitrate, nitrate as nitrogen is 10. The exact same thing, nitrate as nitrogen. Nitrate as nitrate is 45. Nitrate as nitrogen is 10. So it's just half. That's where drinking water, division of drinking water, when it's halfway to the maximum count level, they start having additional requirements to monitor.
And just to say, I think it was in 2015 when they switched from nitrate as NO3 to nitrate as N.
Yeah.
So that's why numbers are different. So if you look at an older report, it'll be 45. Anything current, as in like 2015 and on, is going to be 10. Sometimes, even currently, when you do a lab sample, they actually sample it as both, so you see both numbers. So just something to think about is, what is it? Nitrate is N, 10, or nitrate is NO3, it's the 45.
So somebody mentioned the typical lifespan of a septic system, a typical one that's in the community here. What's the lifespan of a supplemental system / advanced on-site system?
very similar, but again, it has moving parts. Moving parts fail for various reasons. Sometimes it's just because they wear away, because there's friction. Sometimes it's something gets introduced into the system that's not supposed to be in that system. Some things have, cars have to change the oil. These systems don't have that. It's all bushings and different types of plastics and stuff, but there's friction and this stuff wears away. One of the big things is a lot of septic tanks are concrete. Concrete erodes from hydrogen sulfide. It just does. Newer tanks are a little better, but again, they still erode. Plastic tanks, fiberglass tanks have their own issues. And then it's where the liquid's going. Eventually, that soil, because it's still a bacterial process, the pores close up and it no longer accepts liquid. So it's all those different components have different failure spots, different timelines. Depends on what the strength of the wastewater is that's flowing through it. Commercial wastewater is usually a little stronger because you don't have the dilution from things like showers. But again, that's more water flowing through a system. So there's just all sorts of different variables that play into it.
And when we refer to a typical lifespan of a septic system, that's usually looking at a conventional system, and it's usually the kind of the disposal component that we're saying is that it will typically last about 30 years. If you maintain it, it's going to last longer. If you don't maintain it, it's not going to last that long. But that's kind of typical. An advanced system or supplemental treatment system, that disposal field's probably going to last around that same area, but there's going to be more maintenance timelines associated with it to make sure that it's continuing to function on the treatment side. So the system as a whole is probably going to last about the same distance, because it's based on sort of the disposal component going bad at some point in time. But there's going to be more maintenance involved as you roll along. So it kind of doesn't translate completely, because there's going to be more things that you have to fix with the supplemental treatment system in that 30 years, but they typically are not going to necessarily last any longer as an entirety. That disposal field is going to go bad at some point in time.
Okay, there's a number of questions here about different system types, whether it's collection by gravity sewer, combination of initial treatment and collection of step, to either an MBR or some other passive treatment kind of a field, or individual advanced on-site kinds of things. So the first part of the question, I guess, is from your perspectives, is there one that you would recommend or would favor over any of those others? Whether it's step, gravity, advanced on-site, whatever. Is there any of those that you favor over the other?
Check with my staff, but I thought MBR
Yeah.
is the state of the art.
Yeah.
And I just want to say some of those allow for recycled water uses, some don't. So I mean, everything has pros and cons, right? No matter what system, there's some have some benefits, some have other benefits, and it's what works best for this community.
From an advanced on-site standpoint, there's severe limitations with that. We've talked about some of them because it's just, we don't have the capacity to even use them in many areas. But also the oversight and maintenance of those at an individual level becomes very problematic from what we've seen too, because it's, most people don't have an operator that can run their septic system or the wastewater treatment plant. So for us, the preferable method is to have a community treatment system that is managed by somebody that's actually trained and certified to make sure it's working. Trust me, I wouldn't be able to make sure that my supplemental treatment system is working. I don't have the toolkit available, the knowledge to do it. And I know a lot about them, but I don't want to run my own wastewater treatment plant in my backyard, nor do I have the capability of checking it every now and then. It's underground, and I don't have tools to dig it up. So our preference from a local perspective is there's design and siting issues with advanced on-site. There's oversight and operation and maintenance issues and failures that we're seeing with advanced on-site. And there's permitting challenges based on use that we've seen in the area too. And there's just some time it just doesn't work. So, and we have trouble working with individual operators that don't have the skill set as somebody that could do it as a job. And usually what we see is the cost is, like on an individual basis, it ends up being way more because there's no economy of scale. So you have an operator that can go and look at one treatment plant versus, 400 of them going and looking at individual treatment systems. And it just, so for us at a local level, from a regulatory standpoint, we see very difficult and complex problems associated with using advanced on-site as an option for a community. That doesn't mean that it's not or can't be part of a solution for the district as a whole, but we see there's some severe limitations with the feasibility of that.
Yeah, and I think there's some drawbacks also in the funding component. You're
Right.
not going to be able to garner any sort of public funding with that sort of solution. You're also, in the eastern management area of the San Ynez, of the Groundwater Sustainability Agency. So there's an opportunity to reclaim some of that water, recharge the groundwater basin, and then meet the mandates of the groundwater management plan, the groundwater sustainability plan, and support, good stewardship of your resources. So I think there are a lot of options in moving forward with a community-wide solution.
And you made a very good point, Jane, as far as, the cost to the individual homeowners as well. As a lot of times what we see is basically, most of us don't put $50 a month away for the repair of our septic system in 40 years, So we are continually seeing people that basically don't have maybe the resources that some other people have come in and they're just at a loss. They can't afford to put in a supplemental treatment system. And they don't have any other options because there's no community system. Whereas if there's a community system, it's a shared cost across the community too. So those that are less resourced have an opportunity to fix something and pay into something that is more manageable than they would otherwise. So it's sort of that, it's a community benefit in the fact that it also benefits your neighbor that's maybe not as well off or is not, had not planned ahead or just has challenges. I mean, it's just, we see a lot of elderly people coming in too, and it's just, they're on fixed incomes, and to put in a supplemental treatment system, that cost can't be, what do you call it, over time. It can't be, like it
Depreciated.
you can't spread that, and so it's a one-time cost for people that can't afford it. And so that's another big piece of why we see it as a big challenge, because there's these situations that just you run into where there's no options for it.
And to President Finger's point, this is an equity issue.
Yeah.
It's a small community. You want to have a good functioning community, right? And I think that's a benefit to everybody, to the homeowners, to the businesses. That's, again, a community pride and wide project.
I don't think people are trying to hang on to septic tanks for advanced treatment. I think we want to have something that works in the community, but we want the right thing. And I think we're pretty much together. I mean, everything you've said tonight is, you're preaching to the choir to a certain amount. But at the same time,
You have to forgive us. We can want our soapboxes too.
I got the feeling that you were thinking we didn't want that.
Everybody wants
And
to
we
keep
do.
their crappy
We
old
just want to know how to
septic
get
systems,
the right way.
But we were answering the question, right?
Yeah.
That was presented, so that was a question.
Can we ask some questions that are in person, not all written on these cards?
Yeah.
But that's a huge part, right? But when we are shipping our water, let's say like the current plan, the recent plan was to send it a mile south of town and re-inject there. So how would that, since our water flows south?
Again, I haven't looked at the engineering.
I'm just saying, is it not true that if the water flows south, you want to recharge at the northern end? Or no, is that, if I'm wrong,
I wouldn't think so.
I would disagree with that. Absolutely disagree with that.
Yeah, I don't
you
think.
think we'll just recharge it down there and send it to Ballard?
No, why wouldn't we just recharge here? what's the prohibition against
Depends on
recharging
No,
here?
it's not, it's just if we
It's all-
want,
it's all
your,
an
I'm
option.
just, your
It's
point
where-
was to clean,
figure-
like it, you know, it moves.
Put it right back, put it right back
the
there.
option of
There's
where
no
you put it.
evapotranspiration, you know?
Right.
So,
It doesn't.
Can you please talk one person at a time, and can you get closer to the mic, because there are people
Yeah.
online that can't hear. Thank you.
so let me come back to the questions here. So there are two more here related to systems. I'll try and combine them a little bit here. So the Los Olivos wastewater management plan was written a number of years ago. It was pretty focused in one direction. And some of these things we're exploring now are kind of in conflict with that, right? For instance, we've been having a lot of conversation around STEP combined with an MBR system. The wastewater management plan talked about gravity fed to an MBR. Is there any reason, from your perspective as the regulators, that we shouldn't be looking at those things? Should we only be looking at what the wastewater management plan said? Or can we look at things like STEP to MBR? Kind of discuss what
I mean, that's a 13-year-old plan, right? A lot of things have changed in 13 years, and technology has only gotten better. So I think it would be really good to look at the current technology.
so no reason not to explore, for instance, STEP to an MBR.
Dan?
I'm not experienced enough to answer that question. I do think what you need to do is look at the best possible recycling type of system so that you can recharge. And I also think that I have seen a lot of really great systems that fail. And the reason they fail is because they have someone that can operate it properly. And so they two have to come together. If you get something that's so complex that nobody knows how to run it, that's not going to work out either. So those are just things that I've observed, that when you have an operator, it's a science, but it's also an art on how to operate a wastewater treatment plant. And so you've got to get the right fit. And the recycle component is really where the future is, in my opinion.
Perfect segue. So you talk about the recycle component of our project. Do you think it's likely that we can get grants for construction on the collection and treatment facilities as opposed to the recycle facilities?
Not grants.
Yeah, I don't think so. Under any circumstances, I don't think you can get a grant. You're not eligible for, let's say, a principal forgiveness, just given the median household income of the community overall. So I think you're looking at a low interest loan. I think that's a really good option. And I think it's very attractive if you're looking in any sort of funding circumstance to have that reclamation component. Given where we are in the state of California with drought, you know, to Jason's point, we were in a drought for 23 years. We're not going to get out of drought, even if Kachina's filled, with one rainstorm. So we really need to start thinking long term. You have Groundwater Sustainability Agency that you can work with on some of the recharge discussions. And again, it's going to be more attractive to a funder if you have a reclamation component.
Yeah, I think if you don't have a recycled water component, it's not prioritized as much. And the fact that there are issues here at Los Olivos in terms of water quality, that also provides that priority.
Speaking of grants and some of these other things, one of the other pieces that was discussed was a specific addendum to the LAMP for the district here. That wasn't really discussed this evening. Can you comment on that a little bit, please?
Sure.
Go ahead.
So if we get to the point where the community is not moving forward with a solution in terms of protecting water quality, there are two paths, or several paths, but the two main paths are that the Central Coast Water Board identifies the Los Olivos area as needing advanced groundwater treatment, and that directs the county to put a plan in place that protects the groundwater. Or we, at the Central Coast Water Board, put a prohibition of the discharge of waste from septic systems into our basin plan. And then that means that once that prohibition is in place, that anybody that's discharging from a septic system is in violation. and they could get individual cease and desist orders to no longer discharge from their septic system. But again, those are not the authorities we want to invoke. I think the community is very close, I think, in terms of coming to an agreement. It's not fun, we get it, and it's costly, but there needs to be something that gets done.
And we're here to support. We really are. We want to facilitate a solution.
Let me add on to that real quick from the county's perspective as well. So there one lamp potential revision requires actually the county to look at more protections for groundwater based on essentially the risk that is identified and elevated by the regional board, that we're obligated then as the county to say, okay, what other pieces can we put in place to protect that groundwater? The other opportunity we have in amending the lamp would be potentially if there was a sewer system available, then the county can look at, is there a way in which basically we can say, okay, because the sewer is available, and it's going to be installed or available within a certain period of time, can we hold off on requiring the advanced treatment system, knowing that that property owner is going to connect to sewer? So that's sort of another interim strategy that would require the lamp addendum that we, as the county, could explore, but it's really predicated on having a sewer that's available and feasible and, on its way.
In a reasonable time.
In a reasonable time frame, yeah. So, but that gives then us the opportunity when we're regulating septic systems. So if you have a catastrophic failure in your backyard, do you go right to that advanced wastewater treatment system that's going to last 30 years, or is there an opportunity to do something in an interim basis so that you can connect to sewer? Because what we really want to see is we want to see people connect to a centralized collection and treatment system. So whatever form that might take from a design standpoint. So there's some opportunities if the community gets to the point where sewer is, it's been studied, it's been designed, it's maybe not constructed yet, but it's approved, the rates are set, we're moving in that direction in a way that's satisfactory to the regional board and to us as a county, that we're pretty much, we know it's going to get there. Then that gives us an opportunity to say, okay, well, let's look at our local rules on septic systems to say, can we have an interim solution that, allows people to put their money into that connection, and that's the sewer system for the long term, versus, having to put in an expensive repair that's only going to be used for a few years. That doesn't make a lot of sense. But that's kind of how the rules are written right now. So, having that feasible and sewer system available gives us some other options for our lamp that we can look at changing, that might give us some tools to kind of make it so it's easier to transition to sewer.
And to save the homeowner.
And to save the home, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I have one more written question. There's folks online that they're unable to chat. That's what I'm meant over here. So they're not able to ask any questions. So maybe if that's okay with you, Mr. President, we'll start with Paul Rohr, and he can ask a couple of questions. So Paul, go ahead.
Thank you again for coming out here. I'm very heartened by what I've heard. So I think what we've heard, just to put a cap on it, is something that I think everyone agrees on, that something has to be done. But you're not saying what must be done. You've had some ideas, you talked about things, but you're not saying from a regulatory standpoint, you must choose one system over another system, or one location over another location, or anything like that. You're just saying, community, you must deal with it. Is that right? Is that a fair, paraphrasing of what you said?
Correct.
Oh, that's great. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Anne Marie?
Hi. Well, I have a few comments and then a question. So over the summer, I was able to speak with Dana, I think that's how you pronounce her her first name, Jemerson, and she's from the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Board. And after a conversation with her, I also reached out to the Rural Community Assistance Corporation. I just heard a few minutes ago that there might not be any availability for grants. I beg to differ on that because there may be a percentage of the people in Los Olivos who own their homes that don't have the money or the income compared to others. And we would need to do a small study to find out how many individuals there are. And we could, from my understanding, then apply for some grants for that portion of the community. If we're going to go and wrap everything up into the district. So I just want to bring that to everyone's attention, and because we just heard that we probably won't be able to get a grant, but we're only looking at funding for loans. So that is something that our board needs to understand, and if you have any comments that say otherwise, I appreciate that right now. Any comments about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can work with RCAC, Rural Communities Assistance Corporation, and do an income survey. That's what you need to do. You need to invigilate an income survey and then demonstrate that a sector of the population would get a portion of principal forgiveness. But ultimately, that's going to be, I think, a small portion of the overall project cost. So potentially,
absolutely.
Potentially, there's an opportunity for a small portion of principal forgiveness, but I wouldn't, I wouldn't bank on it myself. There's a lot of competition for funding, and there are a lot of very small communities, particularly if you're speaking with the Central Valley Board. That's a whole different animal in terms of small communities and disadvantaged communities.
Yeah, no, they just explained the process to me when I couldn't get a hold of anyone at our regional quality control board. So the next thing is that I'm from Santa Barbara. My mom owns property and I grew up in Los Olivos, which is why I'm attending these meetings. And having been, very active in the community here, I'm well aware that the city and the county can allow people to permit things in the public right-of-way. We actually allow for storm water management in a public right-of-way. I've advocated a number of times that the board can go to the county and ask to have some of these systems installed in the public right-of-way. If you think about what Los Olivos looks like, we don't have sidewalks in front of people's homes. There is a public right-of-way which provides a substantial amount of space in which anything could actually be installed. So people would not necessarily have to go onto someone's property if we decided that we were not going to do an easement. So I just want to, put that out there. And the last thing is that, I am hearing that you have a really strong suggestion to go out and look at new technologies, which we really have not done. But, we had 2 workshops the middle of last year. We're going to have a workshop in January, but we really have not done an exhaustive look to find out what the new technologies are. And that is something that, I'm hearing from you that, that is something that we should do. And it might be, from what I'm understanding, may be less expensive than the traditional, system, which is what we've got this 30%, Stantec design for. So am I hearing that, correctly? And that that's what you want us to do is really look at other systems that, are newer technology that really include that reclaiming and reuse of water.
So yeah, I think ultimately we would support, we're very supportive of reclamation. I think looking at new technology is always helpful. This is Jane. To Taya's point, you have to look at the operability over the long term and ensuring that you have an operator that can operate and maintain that system on an ongoing basis. Because you don't want to have a system that is too complicated for the community and is ultimately then going to burden you financially on the other end. So, again, it needs to be a scalable solution. You have an engineering firm engaged, and they should be able to guide you in this process.
Okay, so what we're gonna do, I think
Tom, can I
Ms.
ask
Moore
you a
has
question?
one more quick question. We are at 8 o'clock. We've
I put it in
taken
a
out
note.
your time.
Yeah.
Was that?
I wrote a note in
Oh.
there. Well,
So there were a couple of, that's what I was saying, there's a couple of people in, Mark gave me a slip, didn't write questions down, so that's what I was saying, maybe you can.
Okay, so if we can do, Ms. Rourke, you can do a quick question, and then Mr. Ravel, a quick question. And let's be mindful of the time of these people that have been generous with us.
You've been very gracious to stay so long. I just wanted to ask Ms. Ray to comment on how, kind of by what authority, Hillary Hauser was able to represent, well, write in an email to Directors Thalem and Palmer and copying Ms. Gray at your DUDAC address, that I, Hillary Hauser, have committed myself to this project by lending HTO, Field to Ocean support, plus Rick Merrifield PEG expertise, plus Jane Gray expertise in finding funding for what we thought would be a well-defined project. And so, was she able to,
So I can't speak for Hillary, and I can tell you that I work for DUDAC, we're an engineering environmental firm, and I am on contract with the County of Santa Barbara for the IRWM program. So we were speaking about integrated regional water management funding as an opportunity for funding.
Okay, so she didn't offer to lend her, or to your knowledge, she didn't lend her support to that.
I can't speak for Hillary Hauser, but I can speak from my professional standpoint that integrated regional water management funding, Central Coast funding area has IRWM funding. Santa Barbara County Water Agency has the contract to work on a statewide level to provide project support and implementation for the utilization of integrated regional water management
I just want to understand the Hill to Ocean component with their
Hillary is a stakeholder on the IRWM, as are all the, so there's 30 cooperating partners, County of Santa Barbara, all the cities, all the wastewater districts, all the community services districts. Peter gets my emails. So in the process of talking about IRWM funding, the discussion also revolves around all other sources of funding, state and local, for countywide projects.
Awesome.
Let's go to Mr. Hertel so that we can close out. Thank you.
All right. Nice to meet all of you again in person. Thank you for being here. Again, having kind of been in this, I don't know, 15, 20 years, I don't even remember now, and going through kind of all the steps. We used to have meetings here full, and we had no district, we had no entity, so that whole painful process of trying to form it was really painful. 13 LAFCOs, thanks to Hillary Hauser, because she was opposing us forming a local district. So there's a lot of kind of non-engineering stuff that kind of happened in the community that we're trying to keep in the past, and so that's why there's a little bit of, I would say, concern of are there still outside influences working to try to mandate something specific for Los Olivos that may be bigger than we need or whatever. So I think it's all in the past, but there's scar tissue that we kind of went through. I'm very happy to hear what you guys said, and basically what I hear is this district, you guys are an independent district. You just hired an engineer a couple weeks ago to further study some of these options because we think the step may be a lot cheaper. Again, the study, the other thing that came out, the 30% design was maybe call it a $50, $60 million project, over $100,000 per parcel, and then O&M. It's a big number. It's going to be hard to get, even with grants and everything, it's going to be hard to get the community to pass it. Plus, it's size so much bigger than what our town needs that a lot of us are seeing tremendous transformation to the town. A lot of us live here because it's this rural little town, right? And the tourists drive here from LA or wherever because it's this rural town. So we want to be careful. Our town's currently zoned for mixed use. We don't even have parking for mixed use. So we want to be careful we don't fix the wastewater problem and then we transform this town by out of the area money. So it's this delicate balance that these guys are tasked with. And so that's why we want them to look at some of these other treatment options and potentially smaller plants that don't 40-year build out us, because I don't think the town really wants 40-year build out. The other thing is we just had Peter super excited over there, it's all rain, but we understand, the ability system's bigger when you have traditional gravity because all that rainwater gets into your system. So that's why we're hoping this district is going to spend the time to kind of understand some of these newer technologies and come to the community after they digest the information, because they've got to be experts at this information. Once they digest it, fill this room up, or maybe go to the gym where we get, like we did the candidates for, and we sent out a couple emails, we had 250 people there, right? That's what it's going to take to build that trust with the community and to get people's input and then get a successful vote. So I see that as kind of where we're at the moment. And you're on a good track. You hired an engineering firm to kind of look at some of these other options, and we may say, you know what, 30% design gravity fed, that's what the town wants. Or we may say, you know what, there's something smaller in there that may, you know. But we're also not afraid to be the first to do something. And I understand that this region, we may be the first to do that, but if you look to Northern California, the Pacific Northwest, there's a lot of examples. And Larry Fay, maybe your predecessor?
I actually worked up in Washington too. And
You did
so,
too?
Yeah, so, yeah, and I know Larry, and, yeah, we've both had, you know, some varied background in wastewater and
Perfect.
options.
So that's where we're like,
You still came down and took this job?
I came most recently from San Diego County,
but Larry, we enjoyed working
Yeah.
with him, and he was telling us about some of these communities. So that's why we kind of want to look potentially outside of the county or outside your region here for other examples of where a small little community can do it right, can be proud of it, and do it without a big battle, and we're successful. And then we can go back to work.
And with that, we can't thank you enough for coming and expressing, you know, your views. It's going to help us all, and I'm really a little disappointed that we don't have more of our community here, because you know, you have said given us a lot of important information. You've been over generous with your time. We'd like to allow you to go back to your life as well. And just thank you so much for coming, and we look forward to collaborating with you as well. That's our goal.
Thank you, we appreciate your time.
5-minute break. I've got 5 after 8. We'll come back around 10 after 8. By that wall over there. Thanks again.
Yeah, we ready? So we just completed our workshop, and we will now convene the regular meeting of the Los Olivos Community Services District, meeting of January 11, 2023. We have done our pledge of allegiance. We have a roll call, please, Mr. Sauer.
President Barron.
Here.
Vice President Ross. Here. Director Parks. Here. Director Kennedy.
Here.
And I'll note for the notes that Director Palmer is not in attendance.
And we would have public comments. Any public comments?
I guess we can maybe file this under sort of loosely for topics for future agenda items, but particularly following that workshop, and that was a lot of bureaucracy for all of us, I think. But I was thinking earlier today, for whatever reason, about back when I was, I think the second time I was a Ninth Circuit law clerk, and we would go to training for the court as new law clerks up in San Francisco, and Justice Stevens used to come because he was from California, from the Ninth Circuit, and even though he was on the Supreme Court, he was our sort of mentor judge, and he would come and he told this story that made me think of all of us. So I'm going to tell it to you, and it may not sing if you're not a lawyer, but he told us this story about working on the case. He had written the opinion for the Supreme Court in a case called INS v. Chadha. And in law school, we all read it, and we talk about it ad nauseum, like a bunch of dorks, and get really into the nitty-gritty and all the technicalities. And we talk about it as a case about a one-house veto, a veto by one house in the Senate, and how that's not allowed. Boring as sin, but it's exciting if you're in law school. So Justice Stevens told us about going out when he was in San Francisco, sitting with the Ninth, and he went out to a Tower Records and was checking out, and he went to pay with his American Express, and he put his card down, and the guy checking him out at Tower Records said, "Anthony Stevens, are you Justice the Stevens on the Supreme Court?" And Justice, even not accustomed to being recognized when he's out and about, said, "Yeah, I am." And the guy said, "I'm Chadha. I'm Mr. Chadha. I'm the guy you wrote about in that opinion. He worked at Tower Records," and it still makes me teary. But they told us the story because we get all caught up in the law and the technicality and the nitty-gritty. But every single case that a court decides or that a lawyer works on is about people. And it's really the same thing for a public agency, right? You're public officials, but you are representing the people here. And sometimes it gets lost in all the contention and in all the who are we trying to please and what hoops do we need to jump through. But this is about this little community that we all love, adore, treasure, and want to protect. And I pledge to you that I don't lose sight of it. And I just really want to remind you, when we get caught up, like last month, the board went through and passed a motion saying we're going to waive our arguably non-existent attorney-client privilege so that people can look at the bills submitted by Mr. Trendle to this agency, to this public agency. But now those bills still aren't available because now Mr. Trendle is asserting his attorney work product privilege over them. So let's not lose sight of the good that can be done if we keep it human.
Thank you. Any other public comments?
None.
Okay. Then we'll move on to the administrative agenda. We have agenda item 4A is approval of the minutes for our regular meeting of December 14th, 2022, and our special meeting of December 30th, 2022. Any comments from the board? Is there public comment on item 4, Mr. Savage?
None.
If there's no comments, could I have a motion to approve item 4A?
I'll make a motion to approve item 4A, the minutes for the regular meeting December 14, 2022, and the special meeting on December 30, 2022.
I'll second.
Second by Director Ross. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. Thank you. Item 4B is review and approval of payment of invoices received. Thank you. They have been reviewed by the Finance Committee. You noted that, Mr. Savage. Thank you for that. Do we have any questions from the board on item 4B, any of the items 1 through 7? If not, could I have a motion for item 4A in its entirety? Or 4B in its entirety?
I move that we approve the invoices listed in item 4B.
I'll second.
Motion second by Director Kennedy. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries 4-0. Item 5, General Manager and District Engineer reports. Mr. Savage? Nothing from Mr. Pike?
All right, I'm, hopefully they can hear me. I'll speak up as loud as I can.
They can't hear you. I just got a text from somewhere online.
I'll do it this way. They can probably hear me now. I'm using my microphone on this laptop, so that should help. Not getting an echo, so that means something's going on with the microphone. So, all right, so let me spin through. I'm going to do a bridge version of the reports that I normally give during these meetings, because there aren't a whole lot of changes in them from prior months. So I'll start with the project status report that is up on the screen now. Groundwater monitoring wells, the report that shows the details of the results from the 2 water wells has been posted with the technical and other documents at the bottom of that page on our website. Brief version of the reports here you can see, and this kind of gives you some of the numbers that we were hearing in the workshop. So nitrate is an N. MW1 is what we refer to as monitoring well 1, which is the one right at the bend of Valley Canyon Road there, right? So on the, I'll call it the western edge of the district, northwestern edge of the district. So 2.6 as nitrate is N, 12 as NO3, and then well 2, which is over here by Refugio Ranch Winery, 10, so right at MCL, and 45, which I think they said it was 45 as NO3. I can't recall what they told us. So that's, of course, a well that's just north of most of downtown, right? It's kind of sitting right in that parking lot right at the northern edge. And as was said, as you go south, probably not going to improve. Effluent study, so of course we saw the draft study in December. There are still a few cleanup invoices that we're looking to get from both vendors, GSI and Confluence. Waiting to hear what comes of some of these workshops, and kind of then we'll wrap the final report up in March, most likely. The assessment engineering report, that's completed, and we received the final invoice. That brings me to a point that the Finance Committee has asked that I expand a little bit the data that's provided as part of the financial part of the little table that I provide you to show you kind of progress as far as, okay, we've put this contract out. In the case of the NG5 contract, you notice under item 4B there, it says final in big print, so that was their final invoice. So they've asked that I give a little more information, so you'll see that in the coming months. We did begin the audit. I provided Moss, Leakey, and Hartzheim with a number of reports out of the county's FIN system. Still on target, as far as I know, to wrap that up in January. And then Regen, which is the independent consultant that you all hired at the special meeting, the contract is signed, and we're basically going to have a kickoff tomorrow for that particular contract with the technical committee. Two other notes. So down there under the other, there are a bunch of the workshop cards in the back. These will go into post boxes here locally tomorrow. I picked them up this afternoon at 4, too late to get them to the post office. And then for those people who don't have a post office box, that instead use some other mailing address for their property taxes, including some of those in the room here, you'll get those via normal mail. This is the exact same thing that if you're on our mailing list, you saw via the mailing list. This was attached, and it was kind of in the body. So those are starting to go out. There's still a couple more meetings I think we'll be having with the project management committee to talk about exact format of that meeting. So we'll be talking more about that to make sure that comes off okay. The only other thing I wanted to report under this particular item is I do have a meeting, was mentioned a couple of times, the GSA, the Groundwater Sustainability Agency. The chair, I think, is his official title of the our local GSA. I'm meeting with them probably next week just to kind of introduce myself, make sure we're following everything that that Eastern region wants us to be following. There may also be some opportunities there to talk to them about some of the monitoring that we're doing and how it might fit into some of their plans and whether or not they have some wells that we can leverage to get additional data. So that's that one. Next quarterly update will be in February. We're having one workshop on the 24th. Through discussion with the project management committee, we decided not to have one the 17th nor the 31st. Instead, we're going to wait for input from that one on the 24th of January, and then decide where and when in February another workshop makes sense. Tentatively, we have scheduled, I believe it's the 21st of February, whatever that third Tuesday is. We have the EHS and Water Board here tonight. On the engineering side, as you can see, January's kind of nothing going on, so there's not a whole lot other than, I should add, the new contract with Regen, because they should be providing their report sometime around the end of the month, just to be clear. Remember, we had hoped we'd have it before that first workshop, but we waited about 3 or 4 weeks to get him started, so he gets to slide 3 or 4 weeks in a fair manner, right? So do expect to see something from him around the end of the month. I don't think it'll negatively impact the workshop we're planning on for the 24th, because we're not going to get into details about this solution over that solution. We're going to be talking in a little more generic terms about what's important to the community. Grants and financing, I will agendize for next month subcommittees. My apologies, Mr. President. I failed to do that this month. So those of you who are on existing committees, I guess, get to serve another month unless those get changed next month, in which case you'll stick on. So that's that one.
Let me stop you there,
Yep.
if I could. Maybe a question for council. One of the committees we had talked about was a grant ad hoc subcommittee to have 2 members of our board just start working on that. In the absence of a board appointment for an ad hoc, is there anything preventing us from just starting that and ratifying it in February, or is that something we would be better off not doing?
My suggestion would be to have it agendized for the appointment, and that way the public knows that there's an ad hoc committee that's been formed, who those members are, so that if they have suggestions or questions or comments about that specific subject matter area for that ad hoc, they know who to go to.
Okay, and then real quickly, I'll spin through this other one that I've gone through on a number of occasions. The options. So this is the one that, you know, is slowly being filled in. Had a good conversation yesterday with Mr. Bounds from Regen about it, and some ways that we might make this more effective as a communication tool and to help the community better understand what's represented here. He also had some very detailed questions about what some of these things mean. Of course, if you haven't been through one of the discussions like we're having here, some of this probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense to you. So he had some questions, and once I clarified things for him, he said, yeah, that's a good start. He said there is no good way to really simply create a rubric like we kind of tried to do here. He said there's too many different moving pieces, but he said also that, you know, maybe we can give it a try given some of the engineering that he's done and some of the other things, or some of the other examples that other communities put together. So for the board members who have helped me create this, you might have some additional good ideas to help us get it to something closer to as I mentioned, some sort of a rubric. Now, for those who aren't familiar with that term, you know, much of what we've been seeing in our reports are rubrics, right? Meaning you have a number of criteria, you weight those criteria, and they say, well, then here's the answer. And between the data we've got here, and I think some of the things we'll get from the workshop, there may be a good opportunity to meld some of that together, and maybe some of these solutions will better float to the top. So I'm not going to go through the details here. None of the data really changed from last month, other than I did add the effluent disposal options at the bottom, but none of the other data really changed, so it's pretty much the same. And that is my report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Savage. Questions from the board of Mr. Savage's report?
So with Regen, have they made a visit yet, or are they going to make a visit to look at the community?
So in case people can't hear you, I'm going to repeat the question. So will Regen be visiting as part of their effort? I did speak to Mr. Bounds about coming into the community. He's agreed to come at least once. It's not exactly clear when he will come, but yes, he did agree to come once.
Questions? Okay. I guess then we move on to.
So you have public comment on this.
Oh, I'm sorry. Public comment. We have Mr. Herthel.
All right, so, what's that?
Can you come close so they can
Yeah.
hear you? Thank you.
So I'm trying to figure out what's going on with this district, why something's not quite functioning properly. And I'm thinking, my school board experience, we don't have very many committees. Right now, we got a finance committee here, we got a finance committee, you got a project management committee, you've got a technical committee. You got all these committees, which immediately take 3 board members out of the discussions, which I think is a problem because, you know, like this thing with the Regen group, which you guys brought up, I kind of think that's like your option for a saving grace of this thing, is to look at these other options thoroughly. And if it's just done by the technical committee, you're missing, and then you got Greg and Lisa Palmer and Julie that are not in these conversations. Big missed opportunity. And so I would encourage, and, you know, have committees where you need them, but like financials of the district, like every board member should understand those forwards and backwards. Technical, every board member should be putting their brain in there. And so what I'm seeing is it's too narrow, and it allows Guy and 2 other board members to be making all these decisions. And you bring them to a board member or a board meeting like this, and it's like people don't get to put their piece in. So I think that's like, I'm trying to think school board this, and like everything is completely open in the school board meetings. I think that's your big problem right now. And I was trying to be really nice in front of all these dignitaries. But the other thing is, why are we rushing, like, like this was a nothing sandwich, you know, like, we already knew all this information. It was good to hear it. But these workshops, when you mail this out to, and you get all the room full of people, you better have some good information for people to like start milling over, because that's the opportunity. We can't start and restart the community very many times if we're expecting success. We've done this before. Believe me, I know it. We did it before. And we, so that's my, that's what I was trying to say. Make sure you guys all you are subject matters experts. So then when you have all your neighbors here, we know what we're talking about. 2 cents.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Hertel, I would just, I think I would want to respond to that.
Yeah.
I've also got extensive experience with other boards, not being on them, but working for them. And that's the difference we have. School board has a superintendent. How many staff does the school district have? And that's a full-time superintendent.
Well,
we have secretary and staff.
And a secretary.
Yeah, and so.
And teachers.
And so.
And a maintenance man.
So we are at a disadvantage because we have a half-time general manager, a contract district engineer, and so a lot of the work to bring some of this forward, we talked about when these things were formed, that it would allow different board members in their areas to kind of go over some of that information and then bring it to the board for the decision. It's not that they're making the decision. They have no authority to make a decision, but then it comes to the board. And we don't have, and so as a result, we're doing a lot of the work here. A lot of the board members have done a lot of the work because we don't have the wherewithal with our funding to have people, do a lot of that. The county has a whole floor of financial people, different sized government entity. I get it, but it's a whole different structure than what we have here. So I think from my perspective, it's important that that we have those kind of, if we did away with those and had all of those discussions at a board meeting, we would probably have to go to 2 board meetings a month and go to midnight. Maybe not, but I think it is an efficient way to do it. We're talking about a grant subcommittee. They can go do the work to seek out those grants. We don't need 5 people to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Understand, but if someone is not, but their brain is their most important asset. And so I just think everybody needs to be engaged in these problems. Because
I think we have a lot of disadvantages, but I think we're good. Okay.
Yeah.
Ms. Gott.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I don't know what's happening tonight with the microphones, but in the previous meetings, we were able to really clearly hear the board members, and tonight it sounds like they're underwater. So if we can first, move the microphone when they're speaking, I would really appreciate that. The second thing is that I sent you some emails prior to tonight's meeting, specifically referencing the chart that's on page 30. I've also received an email since then from Robert Crandall, and he had an exchange with Guy, and it's really clear from the chart, the information that has been inputted into it. And it's also really clear to me that the information that I've provided to the board with the information regarding Tuscan Ridge, aka Paradise, California, on August the 10th of this year, requesting an alternate, another meeting and workshop on the Delta, Presby, and Elgin systems, which would allow us to put virtually everything underground. It would not be unsightly, it's less expensive, and it doesn't have as many working parts. And yes, there are people in the community, actually in San Luis Obispo, and there are probably people here in Santa Barbara County, that actually work on these types of systems and are in charge of maintaining them. But I just want to, go back to that chart that is on page 30, because virtually everything that has been put down regarding the passive treatment
Thank you,
We've
Ms.
already
Scott.
heard from the
Can you-
speakers tonight.
Thank you, Ms. Scott.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. We're going to go to Mr. Rohr. Mr. Rohr, are you on?
Thank you.
Mr. Rohr?
Paul Rourke, can you hear us?
Great, thank you. So, I want to talk about the rubric issue, because I think it's a big one. We had an issue before, there was a rubric, it got populated, the answer that resulted in didn't make people happy, and then members of the board and I think the acting director at that time determined that they would re-weight everything, get the answer they wanted, right? So rubrics, all of the stuff, it is whatever you put into it. And so the idea that's coming out with spitting out an objective answer is not going to be correct unless we set it up for that. One area, and I think Anna Marie just went through this pretty completely, but I'd like to get on something else, because I think you're missing out on what I would call time and risk. And I think those need to be embedded into any sort of study. You really want to do this seriously. So for example, part of your construction cost, right, is not just the hard cost of doing it, the finance cost for the period, the capitalized interest in the period between when you're paying for the bond and before the thing is constructed. So that's something, doing a project that took a year to get up and running versus a project that took 3 years, and you would have millions of dollars of difference. There's also in terms of contingency risk, right? Anything, the more you go underground, the more risk you have, right? The more you have to do relocation of utilities, the more there can be site conditions that aren't knowable, right? So all of that sort of risk has to go in there. In terms of like tearing up downtown, you're going to have claims for temporary takings from the various businesses, right? So that's something that you're going to have to look at, your permanent and temporary takings, and what your expected costs would be, right? Like if my business were going to be closed for a month, I might say, well, my cost here is this much, and you would want to be able to budget that in. That would also mean you also want to consider litigation expense. If there's an area that you would expect to be litigated, and an area that you would expect to not be litigated, you would want to put that in. Inflation risk, that goes into the time category as well. I'd like to put in, there's no contingency in anywhere. Before, and I think Mr. Savage had said, contingency was built into Stantec's proposal, but I don't find it anywhere. Unless they just put it in and didn't show it as a line item, which I've never seen in my life, I don't think it's in there. So you really need to start thinking about all the monetary areas. If you guys want, I'll put it together for you and send over something. But I think, people like, Director Barron, and Mr. Savage, both of them have really extensive, experience, more than I do probably.
Thank you, Mr. Rohr.
Infrastructure projects. I think you should be able to do it.
Thank you, Mr. Rohr. We'll bring it back to the board, and we'll go to item 6.
Thank you, Mr. Rourke.
Thank you, Mr. Rohr. Can you just quiet? Just quiet the speaker.
No, we heard you.
Thank you, Mr. Rohr. Your time is up, Mr. Rohr. It was up a while ago.
You should do it. That's the
So in that case, I'll finish up because I don't want to.
Your time is up, Mr. Rohr.
Okay, great.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. Bring it back for item 6, which is director's comments. Close out our meeting, and item 6, director comments. We'll start on my right with Rick Kennedy.
I have none tonight.
Director Ross.
I only have 3. So first comment is, so we did get a report on the well sampling guide. And do you know if it has the location and depth of the well in it?
So we did receive the lab testing results. GSI and Confluence will be writing up kind of a full report from the groundwater monitoring well. So that will be, I believe, contained in that other.
Okay, so that hasn't come yet?
No.
Okay.
So this is just the, they sent the tests up. Here's the test.
Right, okay, thank you. Okay, based on tonight, are we concerned about workshop attendance? Is there something we can do about that?
Well, this is your time, Director Russ, but I share with that because I think that was stated. I think Mr. Russ said that, what our visitors in the workshop said we already knew that. I disagree. I don't think the community did know that. I heard them say that they could prohibit us discharging our septic tanks to the groundwater unless we do something. I kind of heard that was a possibility, but I didn't actually hear them say that, and the public didn't hear them say that. And I also heard them say that they're going to use that very judiciously, I think, and that they want us to continue to work forward. So, but I share your concern. I maybe have another thought. I don't want to take your time.
Well, I just want to get that out because the 24th isn't too far away. And then the other part about the workshop is I'm hoping that everyone's getting the idea of what we're trying to accomplish there, which is not to tell everyone what we've decided to do, but to find out some more things about what people really want and to bring up issues that we can discuss and say, okay, what do we want to do about this? So it should be very beneficial, but we've got to get people out. And the last thing real quick is, I know we've already done our effluent study, and they talked about effluent drip systems. Was that part of the study? I can't remember. So I don't know if that's something we need to pick up on, or if it's not something we need to do.
Well, I'll just close with a couple of thoughts, and we have a lot to think about, and a lot of work ahead of us. I just wrote down a note, while others, depending on what the workshops, for me the workshops were as much as, I want to hear from the broader community on what their appetite is for this project. We had, 75% approval of forming the district, and we think that that's a mandate that we're going to go do something. And we've had a lot of public comment, highly critical of us moving forward on something. And we then hear tonight from our workshop, the expectations of a community-wide system of some form, and I think we all have to be open to what that is. But when we did the Stantec plan, we made a plan for the whole district because that's what they've been telling us, and they said it again here tonight. Not that it was going to be implemented all at once, but I know enough about this business that when you design a gravity system, you master plan it all at once. You don't do it a little bit at a time because it could cost more. So I wrote a note down to myself. I want it, depending on what our workshop is there an appetite for us to consider an advisory election? I'd look to our council on. I know this happened. I don't know if that's a common thing. We've done ad hoc polling. Mr. Savage is, on our workshops. What night would you like? And you got a fair response to some of those, didn't you? So, I want to understand, where the community is. We've heard from lots of people that some of them have properties here, some of them don't, and we haven't heard from the other 400 or 399 property owners here on what they want to see. I know on my street I've talked to a couple, and I know what they want. They don't want their septic tank anymore, but they're not here to voice that. And they don't want an advanced. I've been criticized for saying I don't like an advanced on-site system. I don't want to maintain that thing. You heard these people say that it's beyond what a homeowner would do. So I think it was very helpful. I just wish there were more people that would have heard that, and that's my frustration coming out a little bit on that. But maybe we think about as a board, how do we get the temperature of the community? Because they're going to have to approve this. We can do whatever we want, but they're going to have to approve it. And I'd sure like to have a better idea of what the greater community would approve. I know what my neighbors want, but that's 4 or 5, not 400. And I know what people who have been regularly attending want or don't want. And some of them aren't affected by what this does. So how do we get to that? That's how I don't know. I guess we'll see from the workshops, and then we'll go from there. But I don't feel like I'm hearing from our community. Hear from Mr. Hertel, I appreciate that. I've had a lot of discussions with Mr. Hertel. You've changed my mind on many things, and you haven't on others. Hopefully I've changed your mind on some, and maybe not others.
I don't have my mind made up on anything.
Yeah.
But I don't understand how you go to a workshop without giving them the information on what these options are. Because like, most people aren't paying attention to this. So you go, do you want this or maybe some of this?
Well, I'd like to know more
That's
from
your
the community on just
You give them
on
a menu.
where they are. Are they still in alignment with the 75% vote that we move forward with the community-wide system?
That was 75% to vote form district. That
Yes,
wasn't
the district had very, yeah, that.
No, but I mean, that's the point you're at, is you have this.
Let's adjourn, I can talk to you.
Yeah,
That's not for this.
But you get a room full of people without options.
I'll go back to
know what
director.
to do. Like, I don't know, this is
Because
where.
I wasn't sure what, because I will say I have a concern about the workshop. I even personally not sure what we're trying to accomplish, what it is we want to know. I don't know. I mean, I would have thought an agenda would be one way to help drive that conversation. It's true, we want to hear from the community what is it they want, but we do have to give them some context in terms of that conversation. Is it really something is it much more high level? Is it, do you want a septic or not? Do you want advanced on-site wastewater or not? Do you want sewer or not? I mean, maybe it's as high level as that, but like I say, for me personally, I'm not sure. I'm not optimistic about this workshop. I don't think we have a good.
Mr. Trindle, are we okay here, or are we getting off base?
Starting to get a little off base.
That's right,
You're expressing your concern about the workshop format, maybe giving some food for Mr. Savage to consider.
I would just then express my concern that we can't develop. We have $200,000 a year. We've limited grant. We can't go out and thoroughly exhaust everything. We got some information coming from the contract, and we'll see where that gets us. And then I hope to hear from the pulse of our thing. I'm going to heed our council's advice, and I'm going to close that and ask for a motion for adjournment.